Sources say that the Big Ten and the SEC are not interested in Florida State. So, what does that mean for their chances for ending up in the Big 12? Welcome to Saturday's Warrior. I'm Trevor, and this is the channel where we talk all things BYU, Big 12, and conference realignment. Now, this last week, Brett McMurphy released an article quoting sources talking about how the Big Ten and the SEC are not interested in adding Florida State, which has just added further fuel to the fire of the reporting and the rumors and the speculation about Florida State and Clemson potentially ending up in the Big 12. Now, this was a big deal, but I was traveling at the time, and during my travels, a flight was canceled. I was stuck in Charlotte. There were no rentals. My family and I had to stay in one of the most disgusting hotels ever with all kinds of things going on, police outside. It was a big adventure. But what does that have to do with realignment? Absolutely nothing. But it kept me from getting to this video sooner. And so I still wanted to jump into it because I think that there's a lot of interesting tidbits quoted from these sources in this article. And so I want to break it down because a lot of people are using this to show that, yes, it means that Florida State and Clemson are definitely going to end up in the Big 12. And that's some of what it kind of sounds like it's suggesting. But I want to take a look at it. So looking at the article, going through parts of it, it says that when the Seminoles break free from the ACC, their top choices would be to join the Big Ten or SEC because of the huge difference in television media rights revenue. Okay, yeah, that's clear. Even as a Big 12 fan, I'm not disputing that. Obviously, they want to get out of the ACC. They're going through these lawsuits. They are fighting tooth and nail to do this, to go to one of these conferences making the most money. So, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Going on, it says, however, there are multiple concerns about adding Florida State. And again, I want to point out that this article is about, we often, and I'll probably do this a lot through the video, but to be clear, the article is just about Florida State, not Florida State and Clemson together. So we'll make that clear. They say it doesn't make financial sense for either league to add Florida State. 2, there's no appetite for more expansion. And 3, FSU has shown it's not a good partner. It's something interesting here. Notable omission from this list is the fact that Florida State is not AAU. That is not mentioned as one of the reasons. So looking at these, not making financial sense, I don't know if that's entirely true. I feel like if the Big 12 has a pro rata clause that these other conferences would also, but maybe that's not the case. If you know, please let me know in the comments. Maybe if they're adding Florida State and Clemson, that they have to take that out of their existing pot, which means that everybody would be making a little bit less. In which case, I understand that they wouldn't be as interested in adding Florida State. Saying there's no more appetite for expansion right now, I kind of believe that. I think perhaps they're not necessarily actively looking for it, but I wouldn't say it's not on their radars at all. I think there's enough smoke out there that I don't think that's entirely true, but I also think that the conferences realize they don't have to be super aggressive, that these options will still be there down the road. And then 3, the fact that FSU is not a good partner. It's very interesting because that's the first time I've seen it quoted and sourced in an article. It's something a lot of people have speculated, saying, how is this going to affect their reputation, or who's going to want to partner with them after this? So I do think that that's very interesting that it is mentioned here. Going on, it says that 3 SEC presidents recently told him that they had no interest in adding Florida State. It takes 12 of the 16 SEC presidents to favor adding another school, which means that they just need to find 2 more to join with those 3, and maybe those votes are already there. This, I believe, because realignment is going to be very political, and I think Florida has a lot of clout in the conference, so if they don't want Florida State, I could see them easily being able to find the votes to keep that from happening. And yeah. But then moving on to the Big Ten, they say one source, however, cautioned, never say never about FSU going to the Big Ten because there could be a path if the ACC disintegrates. So, very interesting. They're leaving the door open. They're saying if the ACC is not there anymore, we could be interested. So, I'll go on because I've got a lot of opinions on this. Uh, it says there is no appetite among the presidents unless there is some catastrophic development with the ACC and it forces the Big Ten into a decision. So they would only do this if they're just absolutely forced, back up against the wall. Okay, we're gonna have to do this. You forces, we'll bring you in now. So to me, this is not saying that the Big Ten is not interested, because if all those things were true, then they would still be true if the ACC disintegrated. And so I just don't see it. But going on, it says if the ACC doesn't implode, Florida State could be in a dangerous spot, which I think is one of the big takeaways a lot of people had from this article, that, showing that they would have to go to the Big 12 because they just wouldn't have anywhere else to go. It says, I don't know if they have a home unless there's a doomsday scenario and the ACC implodes. Again, saying then the Big Ten would be forced to. So FSU is in a bad spot. If there is a need and a desire to expand, you take inventory so your competitors don't get it. But you're saying that there's not a need or desire to expand, but that would change if the ACC implodes, and then it would just be I guess what they're implying is that it's a battle of you take inventory as a defensive measure. And so schools would be paying money to bring in schools that they may not want just so that the other conference doesn't get them. I don't know. I mean, yes, maybe. I've heard that as speculation, around on other videos and on Twitter too. I don't know how much these other schools really want to pay if they're not interested in a school at all, just to be defensive. It does say, but if the price to get out of the ACC is too prohibitive that Florida State and Clemson are the only schools to exit, what happens? And that is the question. What's the upside of Florida State? The source said, we got what we needed by adding USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, and Oregon and Washington were added at 50 cents on the dollar to help USC and UCLA. Who would Florida State help? And at what cost? And most importantly, who's going to pay for it? So first of all, yes, the Big Ten got extra inventory by adding those Western schools, and they are in new time slots so they can play later games. But to say Florida State, who do they help? I mean, their travel isn't insanely out of the way. Florida State has been in the ACC for a long time, traveling up to Boston College, Syracuse, Pitt, Louisville. So none of these, even Maryland, prior to them going to the Big Ten. So that travel is not that different than going to most of those Big Ten schools. So no, that wouldn't be a travel partner. But then you're saying at what cost and who's going to pay for it? Again, I would think that they would be able to find pro rata clauses to bring them in, or at least at 50 cents on the dollar. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe that is coming from those schools. But I think the value that they would bring would be in that next TV deal. So again, maybe this is all just right now. We don't see the value in adding them right now. We could get Florida State later. Why would we bring them in now? That might be the case. But the reasons that they're giving don't completely add up in my mind. And again, they've left the door open to adding those schools if there is this quote unquote doomsday scenario. It goes on and says, if the ACC no longer exists and the floodgates open, allowing a mass exodus from the ACC, North Carolina and Virginia would be highly sought after by the SEC and Big Ten. And this I believe. I think that those two schools, I don't know how highly, but it seems like there's interest from both sides, but they definitely make a lot of sense in both conferences. So I definitely see there being interest from both sides. Again, I don't know if this is in there implying that, these are schools that would be more highly sought after over Florida State. I don't know if that's the implication, or if it's just another interesting tidbit to put in there, maybe alongside Florida State. I don't know. While it's not a requirement for Big Ten schools to be AAU members, it's a preference. And so there's finally that point about the AAU membership is mentioned much near the bottom of the article. And so to me, that shows that that's not exactly what's going to keep Florida State out. So it seems like I believe it. It kind of sounds like the SEC's not interested, but the Big Ten could be, but under the right situation. So we're really in a chicken and egg scenario because FSU and Clemson are suing to leave the ACC, but they only want to get out because they want to go to the SEC and Big Ten. But the SEC is not interested, and the Big Ten doesn't want them if the ACC stays intact. But the ACC will stay intact unless FSU and Clemson leave, meaning that they have to find a home to leave to before the Big Ten could be interested. So it doesn't quite add up. So either the Big Ten is telling the truth that they really won't move on Florida State until the conference implodes, or they're just kind of making excuses, wanting some cover to try to keep their hands clean this time and not look like that they are killing another long-standing traditional power conference. So what are the options that Florida State and Clemson have? Well, first of all, it could be to stay in the ACC either by choice. They say, hey, let's come back, let's make this work, or they're forced to by the courts. I don't see them doing it by choice because they are going through such extreme measures to get out of the conference. I just don't see that happening. But if they are forced to, depending on whatever the rulings are, I could see them once they get closer to the end of the deal. Still, then it becomes more cost effective, not as cost prohibitive to get out of the conference each year that they get closer to the end. Maybe they still try to get out before the Big Ten TV deal expires or the next one begins, and they can begin in the Big Ten at 2030 with that new TV deal where they would bring in that additional value. So that is potentially a course they could take. The other is the lawsuit results in only FSU and Clemson getting out, at which point they could, and if the Big Ten won't take them, if they're true to their word, then that means that they could either go to the Big 12, as a lot of people are saying, or potentially try to make it as independence for the time being until potentially joining one of those power conferences down the road. And then lastly, the lawsuit results in basically all schools being able to leave, but I don't know if anyone from the ACC is going to leave unless Florida State and Clemson leave first, except for perhaps Louisville. So they still have to find a way to try to make it look like everybody's leaving at the same time in order for them to have that invitation to the Big Ten, just so that they can feel good about themselves. So it kind of feels like that's how it has to be, one of those scenarios at this point for them to, be able to allow the Big Ten to feel good and then still make it out of the ACC. And basically, the conference gets destroyed in the process, or at least significantly weakened by losing them as well as other key members. So very interesting stuff here from Brett McMurphy. Very interested to see how all this plays out, and because one thing you have to keep in mind about all these sources, because this is what it was basically talk to a lot of sources and put a lot of quotes in here, trying to piece together what the outlook for Florida State is. But again, all of these sources have agendas. So I believe that everybody said this, and this is at least their talking point, but that does not necessarily mean that is how these parties are going to act when push comes to shove. And so if you're Florida State and you're Clemson, you continue pushing forward with the lawsuits, keep your options open, and continue to try to get into those conferences. But if there's more to this than what I'm really kind of giving credit to, and they really can't get in unless the rest of the conference really starts, becomes a free-for-all, the doomsday scenario, then there could be a real path. I'm not saying the likelihood of Florida State and Clemson, I'm not saying that's the favorite to go to the Big 12, but I do think the likelihood of it happening, it, in my mind at least, has increased from what I was previously thinking. So a very interesting article, and I'm very interested to see where all this goes. Let me know in the comments if you think that Florida State and Clemson will end up in, or which conference you think they'll end up in. Will it be the Big 12, or will they still get into the Big 10? Let me know what you think also about the Big Ten's comments about needing the whole conference to kind of disband, or the catastrophic development forces them into the scenario. Do you think that that is necessary, or do you think that they'll be able to find another way in? Let me know all that in the comments. Please be sure to like the video and subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff, and we will catch you next time. Go Cougs!